72 hours at a standstill, more coffee than a Colombian export statistic, and a code base that's beginning to look like modern art. This week, I let Gemini 2.5 Pro take control of the coding of my app, and I immediately regretted it. With more drama than a Hitchcock thriller, but the production quality of a Hallmark movie, I watched Gemini rewrite my business logic, contradict itself more than once, and gaslight me into thinking I broke everything. And I swear, at one point, it basically called me stupid. I'm Iain, an electronics engineer by training, a startup veteran by experience. I've built and evangelized products that have driven hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. I've built, I've scaled, and I've sold. And I've watched investors cash out. But now, I'm doing this for myself. SmartSwitcher.ai is my new venture, born from a belief that customer choice is vanishing in a world dominated by AI. Businesses are arming themselves with machine learning to predict, to cross-sell, and probably what's going to happen is to miss-sell. All in the name of maximizing revenue. We as consumers are being nudged, we're being tapped, and we're being locked in. Smart Switcher is my counterpunch. Telecoms is where we begin. It's an industry I know well, but it's an industry where with plans, perks, promotions, phones, and bundles, it's difficult to know true costs and even more difficult to compare. I'm building in the open, I'm sharing the journey as I go with AI as my co-founder. Never has it been so easy to turn ideas into reality, but no one said it would be painless. Last week, I switched my coding model to Gemini 2.5 Pro because of its supposed superiority. Was I in for a surprise? So it's been a few weeks since I last touched the chatbot, and this is the core of our interface. I think it's where most online engagement is going. And if you look at the stats, it converts 3 to 4 times better than static forms. So my goal this time, though, and this week, was really to move from what is quite a linear, prescriptive structure in a Q&A form into an agentic LLM-led dialogue. Guardrails around it, the appropriate contextualization in there. And this was really driven because my early testers that I shared this with had fed back to me that it needed more fluidity. So I fired up Windsurf, which is the development environment that I use. I switched from ChatGPT 4.5 into Gemini 2.5 Pro. And within minutes, I was actually super impressed. It went through, it understood the classes, it understood the data flows, it understood the logic there, and it was actually able to map out into a bit of a flow chart how everything was working. This was actually great for me as well because it helped me to remember all of the parts of the application that had been built previously. But what really struck me here was watching Gemini work. And I think the best way I can frame this at the moment is like two gifted overachievers riffing off one another on ideas. The first agent would come up with a suggestion, the second agent would validate that. Back to the first agent, back to the second agent. You could really see a conversation going on within Gemini. What it was able to do was really impressive, and very quickly we'd moved to a place where our static prompt was moving to dynamic, agentic flows, and Actually, it helped me design a prompt that took in the context, that took in the questions that had been previously asked, that was actually able to interrogate some API data and wrap that into the communication style of a Bill Nye, the science guy, or a Neil deGrasse Tyson, or a Professor Brian Cox. Some of these people who are very good at communicating complex subjects to average mortal. So I'm not a developer. I vibe code. Windsurf lets me. Gemini encourage me. It's me. And it's kind of how someone of my competence, or frankly incompetence, can at least get to a prototype demonstrable application. So that's why it's so great. What I found though is that my Gemini overachievers, the twins, if you will, are so fast, so smart, and so bold, I just couldn't keep up. Their diffs came with essays of justification, pages of it. In hindsight, probably I should have put more detail into it, more definition, more workflows around it, but that's not where my competence lies. It sort of brought to mind for me the old carpentry adage, measure twice, cut once. I think the adage here becomes, this is a spinning roulette wheel, and you're hoping every time you commit that commit lands on green. But once the chips are down, you're almost too far in to back out, and you're going to continue to bet and continue to bet and continue to bet. But, you know, this is going on. This isn't so different to what I saw in ChatGPT. So I'm like, okay, let's continue. Let's move this forward, but let's try and put some control around it. And I put more logging in. But I think this is where it becomes really, really interesting observation. Again, both with ChatGPT and with Gemini, maybe 1 in 20 of the commits I was doing would the LLMs suggest actually adding logging itself. That feels quite low to me when you're trying to debug. So we added some logging, and that ironically is when everything went wrong. One approve on the logging update, one scroll later, and I find that 50% of the code in my main application had vanished. Gone. Now, Windsurf has a cool little revert feature. It rolled back the chat for me, but not the code. GitHub, I hadn't pushed my latest commits. The mistakes of an incompetent. All my progress, gone. I prayed for a miracle in the form of a Windsurf update. Literally, that software seems to be updated every day, a new version pushed every day. I hoped it was a known bug. I hoped it would be fixed in the morning. I closed my laptop, went to bed. That was it. The following morning, I was up early. Got my fingers crossed, and I looked in the top right-hand corner to try and find an update, or to see the update symbol. No update. What do I do next? Not going to be able to revert out of Windsurf. I haven't got a GitHub backup here. Somehow, somewhere, Windsurf knows about the changes. So maybe I can scour the directories, see what internal backups might look like. I opened them up, but they were way old. As I'm digging around and going through the Cascade folder system, found a glimmer. There were files there that represented the core sort of 3 or 4 that wrap up my applications. Same names, and most importantly, the modified dates, the morning before my crash. I'm like, maybe this gives me something. So I took the risk, swapped them in, and held my breath. I prompted Gemini, And slowly, bug by bug, variable by variable, we rebuilt. What I would say is this time, actually, the dual agent system seemed to be far more within its sweet spot. It had less constraints because there was less to break. So it really felt like it could sprint ahead with the fixes. But I would say as well that whenever you hit disasters, whenever you hit adversity, often what you build back is better, stronger, more robust, and more comprehensive. In this instance, I got a better picture of what I wanted to actually get out of the app. And because I got nothing to lose, I could sort of be more forward-looking in the prompting and let Gemini actually describe a much better architecture, a much more modular architecture that we would be able to apply. That said, again, we're talking about my level of competence or incompetence around this. So I'm kind of reading what it's saying. I'm thinking, this sounds good. Let's go ahead and again toss that roulette ball onto the wheel. At least we were able to progress and move forward, and maybe within 24 to 48 hours, we're at a place where actually we're feeling progress coming back. But the story isn't over. The Gemini twins managed to stun me again. They'd recreated the app perfectly, but they'd forgotten to use the database. To be fair, I hadn't written in my recreation prompt that you should go use the database. I'd assumed, but there are multiple database helper files in our code base, and given what Gemini had learnt about the code, you'd kind of expect that it would pick it up and use it. But in reality, I think the best analogy I came up with, it was almost like I thought I'd commissioned them to build a skyscraper for me, but in the end, they only finished the lobby. Great tile, great reception, but no elevators. It's brilliant, but it's reckless. So this hubris and overconfidence kind of ran away with it. And with each prompt and each update, I found myself actively having to rein it in. And the idea that if you think about in our app, we have a three-phase stack, if you like. We've got a Postgres database, we've got a Python backend, and then we've got CSS, HTML, JavaScript on the front end. We knew all of our changes were in the Python backend. So for me, it's like, rein it in, make this work with what exists either side of it. And don't you dare change those stuffs, because I know that would have been another rabbit hole of whack-a-mole. We were able to see the agent resurrected, the information being saved to the database, and a real conversational flow there. We were back. We'd finally recovered from 72 hours of pulling out hair. Final thing, of course, commit. Figure out my GitHub repository and make sure I don't get into this problem again. But, these are the things that help us learn.